Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Souls, and today I will be talking to you about literacy within the Philippines. As a brief overview, the Philippines is an island nation of Southeast Asia, and as an archipelago, it's made up of 7,000 plus islands and inlets, lies about 500 miles off the coast of Vietnam. The country's capital is Manila, and its largest city is Quezon City. The country's largest island within Luzon. Both are part of the National Capital Region, aka Metro Manila, located on Luzon, which, like I said, is the largest island. The country itself is named after Philip II, the King of Spain during the colonization of the islands. The Philippines is the second most populous Asian country following India, with English as the official language and one of the only two predominantly Roman Catholic countries within Asia itself. Moving on to the economy, the Philippines is largely an agricultural country. Its economy is based on free enterprise. Individuals and non-governmental entities are free to participate in its development and management, sometimes within the aid of the government's credit. Crops can be grown throughout this year here in this country's rich and fertile soils, and the sector employs nearly 1/3 of its total workforce. Much of the land, hilly and mountainous regions, consist of moist, fertile soils, often with a significant concentration of volcanic ash that supports fruit trees and pineapples. Since the early 1970s, rice production in the Philippines has improved considerably. And in some years, there has been enough of a surplus that rice can be exported. Factors contributing to this increase in output include to the development and use of higher yielding strains of rice, the construction of feeder roads and irrigation canals, and the use of chemical fertilizers and insecticides have also played a part in the country's booming economy. Rice, sugarcane, tobacco, coconuts, and bananas and coffee are all chief exports of the Philippines. Culture. Philippine society is a unique blend of diversity and homogeneity. Although geographically part of Southeast Asia, the country is culturally strongly Euro-American. Forces of assimilation have constantly worked to overcome cultural differences between the various ethnic groups that are scattered. Sometimes in relative isolation throughout the archipelago, nearly 4 centuries of Western rule, however, have left an undeniable imprint on the Philippines, serving as a conduit for the introduction of Western cultural and as the catalyst for the emergence of a sense of Philippine political and cultural unity. Life in the Philippines generally revolves around the extended family, including parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and even up to cousins, sometimes even removed. Those to whom care for children is entrusted should be parents die or otherwise be incapacitated. Godparents will also play a huge part in Filipino culture. Members of extended family typically gather for major events of life, such as baptisms and confirmations and marriages, as well as major religious and other national holidays. Among the religious holidays officially observed in the Philippines are Christmas, Easter, as well as Eid and Ramadan. Other major holidays include New Year's Day, which they have a giant festival for, and Labor Day, which is May 1st for them, and Independence Day, June 12th for them as well. There are various seasonal celebrations and life rituals that call for certain instrumental musics, songs, and dances, and certain Muslim rituals call for a set of gongs suspended horizontally and vertically. And a single-headed drum can be still heard at festival events for days on end. Moving on to population. The population density of the Philippines is quite high, but the distribution of the population is very uneven. Population density per square mile ranges from 961 to 2, which is pretty earth-shattering if you could believe it. And urban rural population is very off. Like, most people usually gravitate towards urban areas, but for this country, most people stay within the rural population. And it's not a big statistics. It's only, I think, 46% to 53%. But the overall population of the Philippines was estimated in the 100,000s, and that's from a 2019 statistic. But since World War II, population has tended to move more from rural areas to towns and cities. At the beginning of the 20th century, more than 4/5 of the population was rural, but by the end of the 21st century, that proportion had dropped to roughly 2/3. Here you could see in the graph the age breakdown within the population density, and you could see the amount of people under 15 is quite earth-shattering to the numbers compared otherwise. The ethnic background of the Philippines. The ethnically diverse people of the Philippines collectively are called Filipinos. The ancestors of the vast majority of the population were of Malay descent that came from Southeast Asian mainland, as well as from what is now known as Indonesia. Contemporary Filipino society consists of nearly 100 culturally and linguistically distinct ethnic groups. Of these, the largest are the Tagalong of Luzon and the Cebuano of the Visayan Islands, each of which constitute about 1/5 of the country's total population, which is pretty crazy. Small numbers of residents, Chinese nationals, immigrants, and from the Indian subcontinent, U.S. nationals, and Spanish add to the population's ethnic and cultural diversity. The Aboriginal inhabitants of the islands were the Negritos, a term referring collectively to the numerous people of dark skin and small stature, including the Eta, the Ita, the Agita, and others. Those communities now constitute the only tiny percentage of local population, which you could see in this graph as other. Moving on to language, the estimate of total numbers of languages and dialects spoken within the Philippines differ, but scholars studied suggests that there are some 150, most of which are closely related to one another. The national language of the Philippines, Filipino, is based on Tagalog and shares a place with English as an official language and medium of instruction. Tagalog includes Filipino, which has the most extensive written literature of all Philippine languages. Cebuano, also a central Philippine language, is used widely in Western Philippines. Moving on to education. The Department of Education ensures that all school-age children and youth receive a basic high-quality education that will allow them to focus and function as productive, socially responsible citizens. Elementary education in the Philippines is compulsory. It starts at age 5 and lasts for 7 years, which consists of 1 age of kindergarten and 6 years of primary education. Secondary education begins at age 12 and lasts for an additional 6 years. Undergraduate college instruction typically is 4 years. There are dozens of state-run universities and colleges, a large portion of them in Metro Manila, as well as a number of private institutions. Vocational schools also offer specialized training for 1 of 3 years, some in collaboration with the Technical Education Skills Development Authority within Philippines, an organization formed through the merger of several government agencies in the mid-90s or so. Here you can see pictures of a few of the students enjoying their school day, raising their hands, doing everything little kids do in class. I just wanted to show you this picture. As you could see, the student to teacher ratio is quite large. And I think it's very unique to the society that they live in, that they could be so accommodating for their children. Literacy. Literacy within the Philippines, which is the ability to read and write, is a priority, and so in any effort to promote literacy by the government organizations or even private individuals is celebrated. The actual percentage of population 15 and over who are literate is actually a very insurmountable task to weigh, because the amount of culture and the amount of languages within the Philippines makes it hard to do so, because you're not judging somebody off of one language. You're judging one person off of one of the 150 plus languages they may speak. Literacy specific initiatives include Every Child a Reader program, which mandates all school divisions and regions to develop interventions addressing reading in schools. A focused K-3 curriculum on language development, including reading, also helps in the contribution to literacy within the Philippines. Activities throughout the year, including Book Week and National Reading Month, are also very well engaged activities. But as of right now, there is no weighable literacy rate within the Philippines. Moving on to politics. The Filipino political scene is marked by parties constantly forming, reforming, merging, and splintering into factions. The Philippines has been governed under 3 constitutions, first of which was promptly instituted in 1935 during the period of the U.S. administration, which it was closely modeled after the U.S. Constitution, and in provisions from the bicameral legislative branch, an executive branch headed by a president, and an independent judiciary branch during the period of martial law in 1972 till 1981 under President Ferdinand Marcos. The old constitution was abolished and replaced by a new document. Adopted in January 1973, the changes in the Philippine government from the U.S.-style presidential system to a parliamentary system took place. The Philippines now is a republic with a presidential form of government, wherein the power is equally divided amongst 3 branches, which is the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The government seeks to act in its best interest of its citizens through systems of checks and balances, and the country's current president is Rodrigo Duterte. Moving on to current events. The Philippines is very prone to national disasters. Over the course of the last few years, typhoons and hurricanes, even tsunamis, have had their impact on the island nation. The United States has also renewed its pledge to protect the Philippines by way of any disaster aid, as well as militant support that they may need. Early in 2020, the Philippines also encountered a very unique disaster front when both a volcano erupted and a typhoon was hitting the shore as well. Perhaps the most pressing foreign policy issue of the Philippines is in 2010s was China's increasingly assertive posture in the South China Sea, which Philippines actually lays in. As the Philippines worked to shore up its weak military forces in 2014, it filed a case with the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, and it sought after ruling under the UN Convention, the Law of the Sea, concerning a reef that was within the Philippine territorial waters. China claimed the ownership of the waters close to the Philippines, and in April 2015 begun construction of an artificial island at Ferry Cross Reef. This heightened the tension in the region. As for the Philippines climate, the Philippines is a tropical and strongly monsoonal, in general rain-bearing winds blowing from the southwest approximately May to October, and the drier winds come in from the northeast from November till February. From June to December, tropical cyclones, aka typhoons, often strike the Philippines. Most of these storms come from the southeast. Their frequency generally increases from the south to the north. In some years, the number of cyclones has reached 25 or even more. November through February constitutes the most agreeable season to visit the Philippines. Here I have inserted some pictures of the rain clouds meeting the volcano clouds and thus creating an energy surge within it. And it was just electricity going everywhere. I thought it was very cool. But the big takeaway of this is that the island nation of the Philippines is a very strong, and it's a very self-made island. They know how to use their economy. They know how to make sure that they have the tools and the agriculture to back it up, and they are a thriving nation, and they've been so since their injunction. So if you have any questions, please let me know. These are just a few links. These are references and the image references, but that is all I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment, and thank you so much for your time. Have a great night.